Picture this. A deserted railway station, swallowed in silence. The cavernous hall that once echoed with hurried footsteps and last-minute farewells now lies unnervingly still. Rows of ticket booths are abandoned, their glass cracked like broken teeth. The benches, layered with dust, seem to wait for passengers who will never return. The air feels thick, heavy, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. And then, there are the clocks. Mounted high above the platforms, on stairwell landings, inside the old waiting rooms, every single clock has frozen in time. Not one at 3:12. Not another at 3:19. But all of them, every last one, stuck forever at 3:17 a.m. Imagine standing there, staring up at those hands locked in place, knowing they have refused to move for years. It's as if time itself surrendered inside this building, abandoning the people who once depended on it to keep their lives in rhythm. And the question that has haunted this station ever since, why did time stop here? For decades, locals have whispered theories. Some say it was a technical malfunction, a freak power surge that rattled the wiring and jammed the mechanics. Others believe it was something more sinister, a mass hallucination, a ripple in reality, or perhaps even a punishment for sins committed long before the first brick was laid. But the most unsettling part? It wasn't just the station clocks that froze. Watches in people's pockets stopped too. Wristwatches, pocket watches, alarm clocks carried in luggage, all stuck at the exact same moment. Even the security cameras cut to black at precisely 3:17, their time stamps burned permanently into the frozen footage. No explanation has ever satisfied those who were there. Survivors recall the sudden stillness, the eerie quiet that descended as the second hand stuttered, and then refused to move again. Some remember flickering lights, others claim they heard faint voices whispering in the rafters. One child survivor, now grown, insists that the station was breathing, as if the building itself was alive and watching. This is not just a ghost story. It is not just folklore passed down from anxious night watchmen or drunken passengers stumbling home. The event is real. It is documented in police reports, buried in corporate files, and etched into the memories of those who lived it. And yet, no one has ever agreed on what truly happened inside these walls. What force could stop every clock simultaneously? What power could silence an entire building and leave behind nothing but questions? Was it mechanical failure? Sabotage? Or something that lies beyond human comprehension? Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of this chilling mystery. We will travel back to the origins of the station, to the blood and sweat that built it. We will examine the folklore whispered by locals, and the dark history that the city has tried to forget. We will hear from investigators who risked their careers chasing answers that nobody wanted to hear. And most importantly, we will confront the night when time itself stopped ticking. But let me leave you with one final image before we begin our descent into the story. Imagine walking through that station today. Your footsteps echoing off stone walls, the faint smell of rust and mildew clinging to the air. Every corner you turn, you feel eyes on you. Then, as you climb the grand staircase, you glance upward, there it is. A massive iron clock, its hands unmoving, its face permanently fixed at 3:17. For some, it's just a relic of a forgotten tragedy. For others, it is a reminder that certain places do not follow the same rules as the rest of the world. And to truly understand why this moment, this frozen second in time, still terrifies those who speak of it, we must go back. Back to the very beginning, to the foundations of a station that may have been cursed before the first passenger ever set foot inside. Because if time really can stop in one place, the terrifying question remains, who decides when it starts again? Every building has a history. Bricks, mortar, steel beams, on their own, they are lifeless. But together, they hold memories. They carry the weight of those who built them, those who suffered within them, and sometimes, those who never left. The train station at the heart of our story was no exception. When it first opened its doors in the late 19th century, it was meant to symbolize progress. A monument to the industrial age, gleaming iron arches and towering glass windows announcing that the city was no longer just a backwater, it was becoming a hub of commerce, travel, and ambition. But beneath the polished marble floors and ornate fixtures, the station's foundation was stained from the very beginning. The land before the tracks, long before tracks were laid, the ground on which the station would stand had a reputation. Old maps marked it as unsettled marshland, but locals whispered darker tales. Some claimed it was once the site of a forgotten burial ground. Others pointed to an 18th-century asylum that burned to the ground nearby, its records conveniently lost. All that remained were rumors, that the dead were buried hastily, unmarked, their spirits restless beneath the soil. By the time railway tycoons purchased the land, those stories were brushed aside. In the name of progress, superstition had no place. But workers soon learned what the investors had chosen to ignore. A dangerous build construction began in the 1880s, and from the start, it was plagued with misfortune. Flooding from underground springs made foundations unstable. Equipment mysteriously broke down, often at the worst possible moments. One engineer wrote in his journal about hearing moaning through the stone, as if the earth itself resisted the project. Accidents became routine. A scaffolding collapse killed 5 men instantly. A boiler explosion burned 2 more beyond recognition. Yet, every death was written off as unfortunate but expected in such an ambitious build. The newspapers, eager to please powerful industrialists, framed the tragedies as the cost of progress. But among the workers, a phrase began to circulate: the ground doesn't want this station. The men behind the money, the tycoons funding the project, were not men of clean reputation. Chief among them was a railway magnate named Horace Greaves. To the public, Greaves was a visionary, a man bringing jobs and opportunity to the city. Privately, however, his name was tied to corruption scandals, bribery, and even whispers of organized crime connections. Greaves didn't care about the land's history, nor about the men dying under his payroll. For him, the station was a monument to power. He reportedly ordered that construction continue day and night until the last stone was set, regardless of mounting fatalities. When critics accused him of cruelty, he famously replied, "The dead do not buy tickets. The living do." That quote would haunt his legacy, even as the station's grand opening was celebrated with fireworks and brass bands. A grand vision, a dark shadow when the station finally opened, it was indeed breathtaking. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, glass skylights bathed the concourse in light, and its sprawling platforms connected the city to every corner of the country. To ordinary citizens, it seemed like a triumph. A gateway to the future. But those who had worked on its foundations, who had buried their fellow men in makeshift graves outside the construction site, spoke of something different. They claimed the station was cursed from the day it opened, its very walls humming with restless energy. Some said you could feel it if you stood in the central hall alone at night, the sense that you weren't standing in a building, but inside something that was watching you. Early signs of trouble. Even in its first years of operation, strange incidents began to pile up. A telegraph operator reportedly vanished mid-shift, leaving behind his coat, his chair still warm. A conductor swore that he saw a shadow figure step onto the tracks moments before a train pulled in, only for no body to be found. And then, of course, there were the clocks. At first, it was small, just a platform clock that occasionally skipped a few seconds or froze for a minute before starting again. But workers joked about it, saying the clocks didn't like working nights. Nobody connected those small malfunctions with the tragedies during construction. Nobody wanted to believe the idea that maybe, just maybe, the station was alive. But one foreman, years later, would recall his unease during those early days. In an interview he gave before his death, he described the feeling as, "Every time I looked up at the clock, I felt like it was looking back at me. Waiting. Progress at any price." Despite the whispers, the station thrived. By the turn of the century, it was one of the busiest in the region. Travelers marveled at its architecture, its efficiency, its ability to shrink the world by connecting distant towns. Politicians praised it as proof of human ingenuity. Yet beneath the polished stone and the proud speeches, there lingered a shadow. The kind of shadow that doesn't fade, no matter how brightly the lights shine. The station may have been built as a symbol of progress. But progress came at a price. And the foundations of this building, the very ground it stood upon, were paid for in blood, secrets, and silence. And as the years would prove, the cost was far from settled. Because the real darkness wasn't in the soil at all. It was in the people who passed through those doors. By the 1920s, the station had shaken off its grim beginnings, at least on the surface. The city had grown into a bustling hub, and the station was its beating heart. Steam billowed from locomotives pulling into platforms, mingling with the smell of coal and fresh coffee from the waiting room cafe. Families bustled through the concourse, soldiers kissed their sweethearts goodbye beneath the vaulted ceiling, and businessmen hurried down the marble staircases clutching their briefcases. For most, the station represented connection, opportunity, and modernity. It was the golden age of travel. A time when train journeys weren't just about getting from one place to another, they were about adventure, possibility, and the promise of reunion. But hidden within this lively rhythm, darkness lingered just below the surface, waiting for its chance to emerge. The family that never reunited. One of the most enduring stories from this era is that of the Halvorsen family. On a cold evening in 1923, 34-year-old Thomas Halvorsen, a dockworker and father of two, finished his shift at the harbor and headed to the station for his usual train home. His wife, Clara, prepared dinner while their children, 6-year-old Peter and 9-year-old Elise, waited at the table, listening for the sound of his boots at the door. But Thomas never arrived. At first, it seemed like a simple case of a missed train. Trains could be delayed, schedules disrupted. But when hours turned into days, Clara's worry turned to dread. She went to the station, demanding answers. The staff confirmed he had indeed entered the building that evening. Witnesses remembered seeing him purchase a ticket. His coat was found hanging in his locker at the docks, suggesting he had every intention of returning home. But there was no trace of him ever boarding a train. And then there was the watch. Thomas carried with him a brass pocket watch, a family heirloom gifted by his father. Weeks after his disappearance, the station's janitor discovered the watch in a maintenance corridor, deep inside the building where passengers never ventured. The timepiece was cracked, its glass face splintered. But what unsettled investigators most wasn't the damage, it was that the hands were frozen at 3:17. Decades before the infamous night when every clock in the station stopped, Thomas's watch had already been silenced at that very same time. Whispers and theories. Authorities offered little help. The official record listed Thomas as a missing person, presumed lost. Clara raised her children alone, always haunted by the thought that the station had swallowed her husband whole. Among locals, the story became something darker. Some whispered that Thomas had fallen victim to foul play, silenced after witnessing something he wasn't meant to see. Others claimed he had simply walked into the station and vanished. As though the building had claimed him. A chilling detail circulated in taverns and backstreets. A railway guard supposedly saw Thomas pause near the central hall clock, staring up at it as if entranced. Seconds later, the guard looked away, and when he turned back, Thomas was gone. The story was dismissed as drunken gossip, but in hindsight, it carried an unsettling echo of the horrors yet to come. A station of stories. Thomas wasn't the only one to disappear in those years, though his case was the most infamous. Passengers occasionally failed to arrive at their destinations. Luggage was sometimes discovered abandoned, its owners never found. Station records show unexplained gaps, tickets purchased but never scanned, names entered into the ledgers that had no return address. To the public, these incidents were invisible. Newspapers focused on the glamour of travel, the politicians cutting ribbons at expansions, the celebrities photographed boarding trains under the station's grand arches. But among the staff, the conductors, the porters, the janitors, an unease simmered. Many reported feeling watched while patrolling the platforms at night. Some refused to work the late shifts entirely, citing strange noises and shadows that moved against the light. The station's heart beat despite the whispers, the station pulsed with life. At rush hour, it seemed as though the building itself was breathing, its cavernous halls inhaling passengers and exhaling them onto trains that stretched across the country. The rhythm of the clocks, the chime of departure bells, the hiss of steam, they blended into a symphony of modern life. But perhaps that is why the first disappearance struck such a deep chord. In a place where schedules ruled, where time dictated every arrival and departure, the sudden freezing of one man's watch was a violation. An interruption of the sacred rhythm that kept the station alive. To those who heard about Thomas's watch, it felt less like coincidence and more like a warning. A reminder that beneath the glamour of steel and stone, something ancient, something restless, had been waiting for its chance to make itself known. Echoes of the future. As the years rolled on, the Halvorsen case faded into memory. New trains arrived, new passengers filled the halls, and progress marched forward. The city expanded, and the station became even more vital to its lifeblood. But every once in a while, a porter would tell a wide-eyed newcomer about the man who vanished without a trace. They would point to the maintenance corridors, the ones dimly lit and rarely used, and say, that's where they found the watch. Still stuck at 317. Don't go down there after midnight. It became part of the folklore of the station, a ghost story passed down between shifts. Most laughed it off. Others shivered quietly and avoided the central hall clock when working alone. And though no one could have known it at the time, Thomas Halvorsen's fate was not just a tragedy of one family. It was the first echo of a much larger pattern. A pattern that would culminate in the single most terrifying night in the station's history, when not just one watch, but every clock within its walls, froze at 317. Every city has its ghost stories. Tales whispered in pubs, retold on stormy nights, passed from parent to child as cautionary legends. But in this city, the station was the epicenter of them all. By the late 1920s, only a few years after the Halvorsen disappearance, the station had already earned an unsettling reputation. To the public eye, it remained a marvel of architecture, a monument to progress. But to those who worked its corridors after dark, it was something else entirely. A place where the living and the dead seemed to overlap. Whispers in the night. One of the earliest accounts came from a night porter named Edwin Mallory. In a police statement from 1927, he described patrolling the eastern platform when he heard what he thought was a train arriving. The whistle blew, the brakes screeched, and steam billowed, yet when he looked, the tracks were empty. Not a single engine in sight. He wasn't the only one. Other employees reported hearing phantom trains at odd hours, always faint, always just far enough away that no one else could confirm. Passengers, too, had strange experiences. A young woman claimed she saw a man in an old-fashioned conductor's uniform wave her toward a platform, only to vanish when she approached. Another traveler swore that while waiting for the midnight train, the overhead clock ticked backward for almost a full minute before resuming its normal rhythm. The railway company dismissed these stories as superstition. Coal smoke, fatigue, and imagination, they said. But among the workers, the phrase, "the damned walk at night," began to spread. The shadow figures. By the 1930s, a more disturbing legend had taken root, the shadow figures. Passengers described them as silhouettes that lingered at the far ends of the platforms, motionless, watching. Some claimed they resembled ordinary travelers in hats and coats, but darker, as if carved from smoke. They never interacted, never spoke, and when approached, they simply disappeared. One chilling report from 1932 described a boy tugging at his mother's dress, insisting, "The dark man is smiling at me." The mother, turning in panic, saw nothing. But other witnesses confirmed the child wasn't alone in his description. Several adults later admitted to seeing a tall, dark outline standing by the clock tower that same evening. None of them could agree on how long it remained there. To some, it vanished instantly. To others, it lingered far too long, long enough to feel deliberate. The Vanishing Watchman, perhaps the most infamous of these early tales, came in 1937, when a night watchman named Samuel Bryce failed to finish his rounds. His lantern was found still burning on the main platform, his notebook lying open on the floor. The last line he wrote, 3:17. Heard footsteps behind me. Going to check. Samuel was never seen again. The station management attempted to hush the story, but rumors spread quickly. Locals began referring to 3:17 as the station's cursed hour. Bars near the station closed early. Mothers warned their children not to linger on the platforms after midnight. And when the central clock began experiencing sudden freezes, sometimes stopping for exactly 1 minute at 3:17 before springing back to life, the legend became unavoidable. Folklore meets fact. Folklorists who later studied the station noted how quickly the stories evolved. Myths that might have remained harmless campfire tales were given weight by documented disappearances and official police records. The line between rumor and fact blurred. One newspaper clipping from 1939 carried the headline, "The Station of Shadows, Harmless Tales or Ominous Truth." The article detailed not only Bryce's disappearance but also at least 6 missing person cases within the past decade that had some connection to the station. Each time, the last known sighting was the same, a man, woman, or child seen entering the station, and never leaving. The locals' belief: by now, the locals treated the station with wary respect. Some refused to set foot inside at night. Others developed rituals to protect themselves, touching the iron rail before boarding a train, whispering a prayer when passing beneath the central clock, or never glancing at the shadows that gathered near the old maintenance corridors. Stories spread that the station was hungry. That it required lives to continue functioning. That each disappearance, each malfunction, was its way of feeding. And while skeptics dismissed these ideas as paranoia, the truth was that the station did inspire something primal, even in those who claimed not to believe. Countless passengers described an inexplicable unease when waiting alone. That sensation of being watched. That whisper in the back of the mind urging them to leave, before it was too late. Police involvement: it wasn't only locals who noticed. Police reports from the 1940s reveal a quiet but persistent presence of law enforcement at the station. Officers were instructed to perform extra patrols during the early morning hours. But the files show a curious pattern: the majority of incident reports, missing persons, thefts, assaults, all clustered around one specific window of time. Between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. And more than half of them specifically marked the minute of 3:17. Coincidence? Statistical anomaly? Or evidence of something much stranger at play? The breaking point: by mid-century, the station was no longer just a place of travel. It was a stage where history, tragedy, and myth collided. Each rumor, each disappearance, each chilling sighting compounded into a reputation the city could not shake. For every train that carried soldiers to war, for every family reunited on the concourse, there was another story whispered in back alleys about the damned station. The grand hall with its skylights and chandeliers might have dazzled the eye, but to those who knew its history, it was a cage where time played by different rules. And still, officials denied everything. Until the night came when denial was no longer possible. When the clock stopped for everyone, all at once, and the entire station froze in a single terrifying moment. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. A cold autumn wind blew across the city, rattling the lampposts outside the station and carrying the faint scent of coal and damp leaves. The last train had departed hours earlier, and inside the station, only a handful of night staff remained, janitors sweeping the concourse, security guards pacing the platforms, and a single ticket clerk finishing paperwork under the harsh glow of a flickering lamp. No one could have predicted that this ordinary night would become the most infamous in the station's long and troubled history. The first anomaly occurred shortly after 3 a.m. On Platform 7, a train engine preparing for a maintenance run stalled mid-track, its lights dimming erratically. The driver reported that all instruments had malfunctioned simultaneously, despite inspections earlier that evening confirming everything was operational. At first, the staff assumed a routine electrical failure. But as minutes passed, unease began to grow. The large iron clock above the main hall ticked slower, its hands quivering before stopping abruptly. One by one, other clocks throughout the station began to follow suit, the tower clocks, the waiting room clocks, the wall-mounted ones in the ticket booths. All froze at exactly 3:17 a.m. A wave of panic rippled through those present. The night staff glanced at one another nervously, muttering reassurances that, "It's probably just a glitch." But instinctively, they all felt the same thing: this was no ordinary malfunction. Witness accounts: several people present that night described the sensation in eerie detail. Security guard Harold Finch later testified that the building seemed to breathe around him, a slow, almost deliberate rhythm that was not human. "I felt watched, like the station itself was alive. The chandeliers swayed slightly, even though there was no breeze. And then I heard whispers, soft, almost like they were coming from the walls themselves." A janitor on Platform 3, Margaret Lyle, recalled her broom shaking violently in her hands before falling to the ground, though no one else was near her. She swore she saw shadow figures moving along the walls that did not reflect in the polished floors. Even the child survivor, who had long told stories of the station's restless nature, now an adult man working late as a clerk, described a sensation of being pulled toward the main hall. "I couldn't stop walking, as if some invisible hand guided me there. And when I looked up at the central clock, it was frozen at 3:17. I knew then that the station had claimed that moment for itself." A building frozen in time inside the station, chaos mingled with the supernatural. Lights flickered violently, then stabilized, the PA system emitted static before falling silent. Trains that had been scheduled for maintenance refused to respond to any controls. Luggage carts rolled slowly across platforms, as if pushed by an unseen force. And the clocks, every single clock, remained frozen, unaffected by attempts to restart them. Watches on employees' wrists stopped instantly at 3:17, as did timepieces carried by passengers who had lingered after the last train. Even the security cameras, powered by separate circuits, cut to black at precisely the same moment. To the staff, it felt as though the station had become a separate dimension, detached from the outside world. Time itself had become a hostage. Panic and realization: by 3:30 a.m., the panic had set in. Staff tried to call for assistance, but every line was dead. Radios picked up only static. The station was isolated. Some described a low hum, like distant machinery vibrating beneath the ground. Others heard disembodied footsteps echoing along empty platforms. One security guard, Thomas Ellery, claimed he saw passengers from decades past, a man with a bowler hat, a woman with a parasol, walking as if trapped in a loop, never acknowledging the living. It was clear to everyone present that the station was no longer a building. It had become an entity. And like every entity in stories told by terrified people across centuries, it wanted something. The survivors' experiences: several individuals would later provide testimonies that shocked investigators. Margaret Lyle described being pressed against a wall by an invisible force, her arms pinned as she watched shadows twist unnaturally in the corners of the hall. "I could feel them, like they were looking through me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I thought I was going to disappear." The child survivor, now adult, recalled the sensation of every heartbeat in the building synchronized with mine, but slower, and then faster, until I thought I would die. Others experienced vivid hallucinations, fleeting visions of the Halvorsen family, long-dead workers, and even Samuel Bryce, the vanished night watchman. Each apparition seemed drawn to the clocks, always fixated on the frozen hands at 3:17. The moment of silence then, at 3:17 exactly, everything stopped, not just the clocks. Footsteps froze mid-step. Paper trembled in the breeze and then hung motionless. The hum of electricity went silent. Even the shadows seemed suspended. For a full 30 seconds, time held its breath. And in that terrifying silence, every person present reported the same sensation: a weight pressing down, a conscious awareness that they were not alone. The station itself was alive. It had paused reality, and they were trapped inside. When the lights flickered back, the clocks remained frozen. No one spoke at first. Some wept. Others could not move. The building was calm again, but the atmosphere had shifted permanently. Aftermath of the event. When officials arrived the next morning, they were confronted with a scene that defied explanation. Every clock in the station, including those in maintenance corridors, offices, and the tower, was frozen at 3:17. Every watch recovered from staff and passengers bore the same mark. Security camera footage revealed nothing but black screens at the exact moment the event occurred. Engineers examined the electrical systems. There was no failure. No sabotage. No anomaly that could account for the universal stoppage. And while authorities attempted to explain it as a power surge or synchronization error, the people who were there knew the truth: something had intentionally stopped time. The legend begins: this night would cement the station's reputation as a place where the laws of reality were bent. Witnesses' testimonies were collected, filed, and then quietly shelved. Corporate executives sought to minimize the event, fearing panic and public backlash. Newspapers reported minor technical difficulties, but avoided the chilling details that would later leak through personal diaries, letters, and interviews. Locals, however, remembered. They whispered of the night when the station breathed, when time itself stopped, and when the hands of every clock aligned on a single, ominous moment. It became the story every shift worker passed down. The cautionary tale told to children, warning them, some places are not just haunted, they are alive. And it was only the beginning. Because if one night could freeze time in a single station, what would happen when the darkness that haunted it returned in other forms, beyond the comprehension of any living person? The morning after the night of frozen clocks, the station was transformed. What had once been a bustling hub of steel, steam, and human activity now felt like a tomb. Time had returned, or so it seemed, but the events of 3:17 left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed them. Authorities were called in, not just to inspect the station, but to salvage credibility. Engineers, electricians, and police investigators descended upon the site, each tasked with piecing together an explanation. But what they encountered defied logic. Initial Investigation Chief Inspector Harold Duval, a man known for his methodical approach and a reputation for skepticism, led the inquiry. He arrived at the station at dawn, notebook in hand, determined to apply reason to the chaos. Initial examinations were baffling. Every mechanical clock in the station was perfectly intact, yet every single one was frozen at 3:17. Electrical systems were operating normally, generators showed no signs of overload. Security footage cut to black precisely at the moment of the incident, then resumed with no interruption to power. Even more disturbing, personal watches recovered from employees and passengers were similarly stopped. Their hands were frozen as if the very fabric of time had been clawed away, leaving a void in its place. Duval wrote in his report, "I have never encountered a mechanical failure that obeyed no laws of physics, affecting objects without common circuitry or connection. I am forced to consider possibilities I have no words for." Witness testimonies. Investigators quickly realized that the station staff had experienced more than mechanical malfunctions, they had felt something. Security guard Harold Finch described the sensation of being watched by something vast and deliberate, while the clerk who had once survived the Halvorsen disappearance insisted the station wanted the moment of 3:17 for itself. "It wasn't fear of what I saw," he said. "It was fear of what I couldn't see. And yet, I felt it everywhere." The combined accounts revealed a pattern. The station seemed alive, responding to the presence of humans in subtle ways, shadows moving independently, whispers that appeared only at certain points, sudden temperature drops localized around specific corridors. Investigators, trained in logic and protocol, documented every anomaly, but as their notebooks filled, their skepticism began to erode. Some officers reported sleepless nights. Others developed a compulsion to return to the station alone, trying to confirm their doubts. Enter the paranormal theorists. By the following week, word of the event spread beyond local newspapers. Paranormal researchers arrived, drawn to the unprecedented nature of the phenomenon. Unlike typical, haunted, reports, this event left tangible evidence: frozen clocks, synchronized watches, and electrical anomalies that defied explanation. Dr. Eliza Karn, a physicist turned paranormal investigator, was particularly intrigued. She hypothesized that a localized temporal distortion, a time pocket, might have occurred, though she admitted she had no means of proving it. If time can pause in a single location, even momentarily, it opens questions we aren't equipped to answer. We are trained to measure matter and energy, not the flow of time itself. Her experiments, conducted in the aftermath, recorded subtle fluctuations in electromagnetic fields around the station, but nothing that could account for the precise synchronization of every clock. Obsession takes hold among the investigators. A quiet obsession began to emerge. Detective Leonard Hayes, assigned to the missing person aspect of the inquiry, spent long nights at the station, documenting everything from creaking floorboards to minor electrical irregularities. He refused to leave, even after repeated warnings from superiors. Hayes' journals reveal a man gradually consumed by the station. I watch the clocks, noting every second. I listen for sounds that others claim are imagined. The building is patient. It waits. I feel it probing my thoughts, learning my habits. I am afraid to leave, yet I cannot stay away. It was as if the building had become a character in its own right, a living, patient observer. Hayes' descent into obsession mirrored those who had vanished decades earlier. Discovery of anomalies. The investigation also uncovered strange, physical anomalies. Walls and maintenance corridors bore scratches and gouges inconsistent with construction wear. Certain floor tiles were cracked, revealing tunnels that did not appear on any official blueprints. It was in one of these tunnels that the most disturbing discovery occurred: a series of iron doors sealed decades prior, hidden beneath layers of concrete. Behind the first door, investigators found remnants of old construction equipment, tools scattered as if the workers had simply vanished mid-shift. Further along, behind a second door, Hayes discovered journals. They belonged to workers from the station's earliest days, some written by men long considered dead. The entries detailed unsettling phenomena: shadows moving in broad daylight, tools vanishing inexplicably, and a sense that the station itself was conscious. One passage in particular stood out: I hear it in the stone. The station waits. It will take what it desires, and it does not forget. If the clocks stop, we are not safe. Corporate pressure and suppression. Despite these findings, the railway company sought to suppress the investigation. Executives feared panic and loss of revenue. Official reports minimized the anomalies, attributing the frozen clocks to coincidental electrical failures. Investigators were warned not to speak publicly. But the truth had a way of leaking. Leaked journal pages, personal testimonies, and even some photographs taken by investigative journalists began to circulate, further fueling the legend of the station. Escalating tension. By the end of the initial inquiry, the station remained a place of dread. Employees refused to work night shifts. Paranormal investigators documented new anomalies, including recurring sounds and shadows, always centered around the maintenance tunnels. Hayes continued his obsessive nightly patrols, documenting phenomena no one else seemed willing to record. The station had become a nexus of human fear, a magnet for obsession, and a stage for events that could not be explained. Investigators understood only one thing with certainty: whatever had caused the clocks to stop at 3:17 was not a one-time accident. It had left a mark on the station, and on every person who had been there. The foreshadowing: one night, as Hayes lingered in the central hall, he noticed a faint tremor in the floorboards, as if the station itself were inhaling. The clocks, still frozen in parts of the maintenance corridors, seemed to hum softly. Hayes wrote, "It watches us. And it waits. I fear it knows we are trying to understand. That knowledge is its delight." This would not be the end of his investigation. Not by a long stretch. In fact, it was only the beginning. Because buried beneath the floors of the station, hidden behind iron doors and secret tunnels, lay a history older and darker than anyone had imagined. And the next discovery would shatter every preconception of what the station truly was. Beneath the grand station, under polished marble floors and the bustling platforms, there was a secret that even the most seasoned employees had never noticed. A tunnel, long sealed, hidden from every official blueprint and erased from city records. It was Detective Leonard Hayes who first stumbled upon it. Obsessive, sleepless, and now deeply entwined with the station's mysteries, he noticed a discrepancy while comparing old construction plans to the building as it stood in the 1940s. A maintenance corridor near Platform 8 had no documented purpose. And yet, floor tiles above it were subtly warped, as though something below exerted pressure against them for decades. The entrance revealed the discovery was accidental. While inspecting the warped tiles, Hayes pried one loose and found a rusted iron handle. Behind it was a narrow doorway, sealed with a heavy iron plate and thick layers of dust. A faint smell of mildew and earth seeped through the cracks. When Hayes finally forced the door open, a cold rush of air struck him. It smelled of damp stone, rust, and something else, something indefinably human. He shone his flashlight inside and found a tunnel extending far beneath the station, disappearing into darkness. This was a space untouched for decades. The air was still, even the slightest sound echoed as though amplified. Hayes' instincts screamed at him, this was a place where ordinary rules did not apply. The tunnel's secrets. As Hayes explored further, the first signs of human presence emerged. Old construction tools, hammers, wrenches, and pickaxes, lay scattered, some embedded in cracked stone walls. Rusted carts, once used to transport materials, were abandoned mid-track, as if the workers had simply vanished. Scratches marred the walls, gouges deep enough to catch fingernails. Some markings were arranged haphazardly, others appeared deliberate, forming symbols or patterns that Hayes could not decipher. Many of the scratches were dated, etched into the stone using charcoal or sharp tools. The dates predated the station's official opening, suggesting that whoever made them was aware of events that had yet to occur, or perhaps existed outside the normal flow of time itself. It was here that Hayes began to notice something even more chilling, faint scuff marks that resembled footprints, but were impossible to place. Some were small, like children's, others were enormous, stretching across the tunnel in ways no human could account for. They crisscrossed one another, as if multiple entities had moved through this subterranean labyrinth simultaneously, and some had returned again and again over decades. The journey deeper into the tunnel, Hayes discovered a small alcove hidden behind a collapsed wall. Inside lay a pile of journals, remarkably preserved. They belonged to construction workers from the station's earliest days, men who, according to official records, had vanished or died under mysterious circumstances. The entries were disjointed, written in a hurried, almost manic hand. One worker described the walls, whispering to him during the night shifts, urging him to continue digging. Another claimed to have heard voices calling his name from corners where no one stood. One entry was particularly haunting, "We dug too deep. The stone is alive. It watches. It knows. We cannot leave. Every tool we touch, every brick we lay, it marks us. If the clocks stop, we are not safe." Hayes shivered as he read it. He had already witnessed the frozen clocks, heard whispers in the maintenance corridors, and felt the building's almost sentient presence. Now, these writings confirmed that the phenomena were not new, they were embedded in the station's very foundation. Unnatural architecture. The tunnel itself defied logic. Its walls twisted at subtle angles, forming passages that seemed longer than they should be. Some corridors doubled back in impossible ways, giving the impression that time and space were not fixed here. Hayes noticed a strange optical effect. Shadows appeared stretched or compressed, depending on the angle of the light, and sometimes moved independently of him. It was as though the tunnel existed partially outside normal reality, a liminal space where human perception could not fully comprehend the architecture. Hayes' meticulous notes described the sensation of being watched constantly, though he never saw anyone, or anything, directly. Evidence of the lost throughout the tunnel, Hayes found personal items, a pocket watch frozen at 3:17, a child's scarf, a discarded shoe, and fragments of newspapers dating back decades. Each artifact hinted at lives interrupted, swallowed by the station's subterranean maze. He realized with dawning horror that this tunnel was a repository of vanished souls, both literally and metaphorically. The workers who had first built the station, the travelers who had disappeared over the years, and even those like Thomas Halvorsen, all had connections to this hidden world. Every artifact seemed to pulse with the same energy that had frozen the clocks. Hayes felt a direct, almost conscious link. The station was not merely a structure, it was an active participant in the disappearances, collecting fragments of time, memory, and life itself. Signs of ritual even more disturbing were markings suggesting deliberate ritual. In one chamber, Hayes found symbols scratched into the stone floor, encircling a shallow pit. Charcoal remnants hinted that candles or torches had once burned there. The symbols were unrecognizable, neither religious nor cultural in origin, yet they carried an unmistakable sense of purpose. Was this the work of the workers, driven mad by the station? Or was it something older, something that had existed in the stone long before the first hammer fell? Hayes could not tell. But the symbols, combined with the frozen clocks and the whispers, suggested that the tunnel was more than a construction corridor, it was a threshold, a place where human and supernatural forces converged. A chilling realization as Hayes explored, he noticed the temperature drop. Where the air had been merely cold at the entrance, it grew frigid, and his breath became visible. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. And then he saw it, a faint glow at the far end of the tunnel, pulsing like a heartbeat, drawing him forward. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But his obsession, coupled with the knowledge that he might uncover truths no one else dared seek, propelled him onward. The tunnel beneath the station was not merely a passageway. It was a mirror of the building itself, alive, patient, and hungry. It held the echoes of every life the station had claimed and hinted at events yet to come. Hayes realized something chilling: the station's story was far from over. The tunnels, journals, artifacts, and markings all suggested a continuity of influence, an intelligence embedded in stone and steel that had persisted across decades. And he could feel it watching him, waiting for his next move. Foreshadowing this discovery marked a turning point. The hidden tunnel was the first tangible proof that the station's phenomena were rooted in something physical, yet inexplicable. It hinted at a deeper, more horrifying reality. The station's influence was not confined to one night, one clock, or even one generation. The frozen clocks, the whispers, the shadows, they were symptoms of a far older, persistent presence. A presence that would continue to manipulate time, space, and human perception. Hayes left the tunnel that night with his notes, journals, and photographs, but the sense of being watched followed him. He knew instinctively that the tunnel, and the station itself, had more secrets. Secrets that, if revealed, could redefine the boundaries between reality, memory, and something far darker. The journals were discovered in the depths of the forgotten tunnel, hidden beneath layers of dust and decay. Bound in cracked leather and yellowed with age, they bore the names of men who had vanished during the station's earliest days, workers who had been recorded as missing or killed in accidental incidents during construction. Detective Leonard Hayes handled the journals with reverence, knowing that within these fragile pages lay the most intimate accounts of the station's dark history. As he turned each page, the voices of the past began to speak, whispering through time, bridging decades in a single moment. Samuel Whitaker, the first entry. Samuel Whitaker, a young laborer, was the earliest chronicler. His handwriting was neat, almost meticulous, in sharp contrast to the terror he described. The stone is alive. I hear it at night, whispering through the walls. It seems to breathe. I do not know if it desires me or seeks to warn me, but I cannot stop listening. I dare not sleep. Whitaker's entries grew increasingly erratic over time. He described shadows that moved independently, tools vanishing only to reappear in impossible locations, and an oppressive presence that seemed to follow him through the corridors. I am certain it is aware of me. When I lift my eyes to the clock, I feel its gaze. Every tick is a heartbeat I cannot ignore. The hands will not move tonight. I know it. Whitaker vanished a week after his last entry. No body was ever recovered. Only his journal remained, preserved as though the station itself wanted his story to endure. Thomas Calhoun, The Descent into Madness. Another journal belonged to Thomas Calhoun, a foreman supervising night shifts. His entries were more detailed, describing both physical and psychological phenomena. The tunnels are alive. They change when I am not looking. Passages lengthen and shrink. Shadows gather where none should exist. Last night, I saw a man standing at the end of the corridor. I called his name. He did not answer. When I approached, he vanished. And yet I feel him behind me still. Calhoun's words reveal the growing paranoia that consumed the workers. He began marking symbols on walls, scratches and carvings intended as warnings, perhaps to others, perhaps to himself. I cannot trust what I see. I cannot trust what I hear. The station listens, remembers. I have drawn the symbols to mark my sanity, but I fear they are meaningless. The timepiece in my pocket stopped today. 3:17, I do not understand. Humanizing the victims. These journals do more than report events, they humanize the victims. Through their words, we understand their fear, their hope, and their isolation. They were ordinary men, trying to earn a living, suddenly caught in an environment that defied reason. Whitaker writes of a missed supper, of letters never sent, of children who would never know him. Calhoun writes of the pressure to complete the station, the demands of tycoons like Horace Greaves, and the creeping realization that the very building was conspiring against them. Their voices reveal a recurring theme: the station was not merely a place, but an entity, patient and deliberate, capable of observing and influencing human behavior. The pattern of 3:17 a.m. chilling pattern emerges in the journals, the recurring reference to 3:17. Multiple workers, across years, noted that their watches or clocks would inexplicably freeze at that exact moment. Some described hearing whispers, seeing shadows, or feeling a presence pressing against them. Others vanished entirely, never to be seen again. Hayes noted that the journals collectively spanned decades, yet each account culminated in the same minute. The synchronicity suggested more than coincidence. It hinted at a rhythm imposed by the station itself, a cadence of control, one that transcended human understanding. Psychological toll. The journals also reveal the psychological toll on those trapped within the station. Calhoun writes, "Sleep eludes me. I hear voices in the stone. I see faces where none exist. I am not sure if I am awake or dreaming. I pray for a train to arrive, but the platforms remain empty. Time is meaningless here, yet I feel it pressing on me." These passages illustrate the slow burn of terror that haunted the workers. The fear was not sudden, it was cumulative, building over days, weeks, and months. Hayes recognized the same slow-burning tension described by night staff who witnessed the frozen clocks decades later. The disappearances. The journals provide context to the disappearances long reported in oral histories. Whitaker and Calhoun both hint at colleagues vanishing mid-shift, tools dropped, boots left behind, as though the station swallowed them whole. James was here one moment, then gone the next. His hammer lies on the floor, untouched. I hear him calling my name, but the corridor is empty. I am afraid to look again. The cumulative effect is haunting: ordinary people, performing ordinary work, consumed by a building that behaves with a conscious, malevolent intelligence. The journals suggest that these events were not accidents, they were deliberate, orchestrated by the station in some incomprehensible way. Hayes' reflections. For Hayes, reading these journals was transformative. They confirmed what he had begun to suspect: the station's phenomena were consistent, traceable, and intentional. The frozen clocks, the shadows, the whispers, they were all connected, part of a larger design. Yet the journals also raised questions Hayes could not answer. How did the station exert its influence across decades? Were these events purely supernatural, or was there a physical mechanism yet undiscovered? And most importantly, why did the minute 3:17 hold such significance? Every page of the journals left him with more questions than answers. But they also provided clues, breadcrumbs leading deeper into the station's mysteries, clues that would guide him toward discoveries in the tunnels, the clocks, and the very architecture itself. Foreshadowing: the journals end abruptly. The last entries are hastily scrawled, full of fragmented sentences, panic, and despair. Hayes noticed a recurring motif: symbols drawn around clocks, sketches of shadowy figures, and repeated references to the hands frozen in time. These entries were not merely records, they were warnings. Warnings to anyone who would follow in their footsteps, to anyone who dared to explore the station's depths. And yet, the warnings were tantalizingly incomplete. The final question remained unanswered: what truly lay at the heart of the station's control over time? Hayes closed the journals and looked up from the flickering candlelight. He knew that the answers were not in the past, they were beneath his feet, deeper in the tunnels, and perhaps even within the walls themselves. The station was still alive, still patient, and still waiting. And for the first time, Hayes understood, he had only scratched the surface of the building's secrets. Time is usually a constant. Every second ticks with mechanical precision, every minute a faithful repetition of the last. And yet, in the haunted station, time had betrayed that trust. The night of the frozen clocks had proved it. But the question lingered: how could every clock, from massive tower faces to personal pocket watches, stop at exactly 3:17, and resume as though nothing had happened? The answer, Hayes believed, might lie not in engineering, but in the hands of a man who knew clocks better than anyone: Elias Grenwald, the station's master clockmaker. The clockmaker arrives. Grenwald had been brought in quietly by the railway company after repeated failures to explain the 3:17 phenomenon. Unlike investigators or paranormal theorists, he approached the station with a practical mind. To him, time was measured, precise, and obedient. If something had gone wrong, he intended to find it. From the moment Grenwald entered the central hall, he felt it, the same oppressive awareness reported by staff, the subtle tremor in the floor, the whisper of shadows just out of sight. He shook his head, dismissing it as nerves. A clockmaker, after all, dealt in gears, springs, and balance wheels, not ghosts. Mechanical anomalies. Grenwald began his inspection systematically. He tested the main tower clock, the platform clocks, and every timepiece in the maintenance corridors. Each mechanical component was intact, perfectly calibrated, and in working order. But the hands refused to move past 3:17 without external interference. Even manual manipulation failed. Springs could be wound, pendulums swung, gears adjusted, and yet the frozen position held, unyielding. "I have seen clocks break in ways I cannot explain," Grenwald wrote later. Springs snapping, pendulums falling, mechanisms worn beyond repair. But never have I seen a clock resist so completely, as if the very concept of time had been denied entry. Every failure confirmed what Hayes had suspected: this was not a mechanical problem. It was something else. Something external. Something alive. The first clue: Grenwald noticed a curious pattern. The stops were not random, they occurred simultaneously in every location, across devices entirely disconnected electrically or mechanically. Pocket watches, wall-mounted clocks, tower mechanisms, even the train's internal timepieces, all stopped at the same minute. It was more than coincidence. Grenwald sketched diagrams, trying to find a correlation, and realized that the frozen hands always corresponded with the exact position of the hands on the central hall clock at 3:17. It was as if the central clock dictated the motion of all others, a synchronization that should have been impossible. If the station itself sets time, then perhaps time is a prisoner here, not a tool, he mused. The hidden mechanism. Grenwald's investigation led him deeper into the station's hidden infrastructure. Behind a wall in the clock tower, he found something extraordinary, a series of interlocking gears and levers that did not correspond to any blueprints. The metalwork appeared old, decades older than the station itself, yet it was precise and functional. As he examined the mechanism, Grenwald discovered faint scratches, symbols remarkably similar to those found in the tunnel journals. They formed a pattern around a central gear, almost ritualistic. These are not merely mechanical instructions, he noted. They are a language of intent, an encoding of purpose. The station is not just built, it is designed to think. He tested the mechanism, cautiously moving the central gear. The clocks above ticked backward for a moment, then resumed their frozen state at 3:17. Grenwald realized he had uncovered not a malfunction, but a conduit, a focal point linking the physical clocks to something far greater. Time as a weapon. Grenwald began to consider the implications. If a central mechanism could influence all clocks simultaneously, could it also influence perception? Could it, as staff had reported, manipulate events, shadows, and even human consciousness? He documented what he had seen and felt. During his inspection, he sensed changes in ambient air pressure, subtle drafts where none should exist, and the faint hum of a pulse beneath the floors. The station did not merely contain time, it exerted control over it. It is as though the building itself knows the value of every second, Grenwald wrote. And it can withhold or release time at will. 3:17 is not random. It is a heartbeat. The supernatural hypothesis. Grenwald, a man trained to measure the measurable, began entertaining thoughts he would never have admitted before. The synchronization across centuries, the alignment of mechanical and electrical devices, and the consistent reference to 3:17 suggested a design beyond human capability. Either the station is a marvel of engineering beyond comprehension, or it is something else. Something intelligent. Something patient. He noticed one detail that chilled him to the bone. Every time he returned to the central clock, he felt a presence, subtle and persuasive, almost as if the building itself was aware of his scrutiny. The station did not merely hide its secrets, it actively guarded them. Connecting the dots. Grenwald collaborated closely with Hayes, cross-referencing mechanical data with the journals from the tunnel. Together, they began to see a terrifying picture: the station's design, the tunnels, the journals, the frozen clocks, all interconnected. The workers' disappearances, the haunting sightings, and the synchronized stoppage of time were not random. They were part of a system that had existed since the station's construction, one that operated in tandem with something unseen, yet omnipresent. Grenwald speculated, perhaps the station could manipulate time locally, creating an environment where the laws of reality bent, allowing it to influence human perception and even life itself. It is not haunted in the traditional sense, he concluded. It is alive, and 3:17 is the pulse of its being. The emotional toll for Hayes. Grenwald's discoveries confirmed what he had long feared. The station was not simply a site of tragedy, it was a conscious entity, capable of orchestrating events over decades, perhaps centuries. The human cost was staggering: missing workers, vanished travelers, and the psychological trauma of those who survived encounters. Yet, there was also fascination. For both men, the blend of technical insight and supernatural implication created a paradox: the station could be studied, partially understood, but never fully tamed. Every gear, every scratch, every journal entry hinted at deeper layers, concealed from observation. Foreshadowing the final truth. Grenwald's investigation closed with a warning: the clocks, the station, and its tunnels were only part of the story. The presence behind the frozen hands, the intelligence, the design, the hunger, remained a mystery. If we continue to probe, we risk provoking it. But if we do not, others will vanish. The station waits, patient and deliberate. 3:17 is not an hour. It is a signal. The clockmaker's discovery marked a turning point. It merged the tangible and intangible, the mechanical and the supernatural, and it set the stage for the revelations to come. Hayes and Grenwald had uncovered the skeleton of the truth, but the flesh, the full horror, remained hidden in the shadows. And the station was still watching. By now, Detective Leonard Hayes and Elias Grenwald had seen enough to understand the enormity of what they were dealing with. The station was no longer just a building. It was a living entity, capable of bending time, manipulating perception, and claiming the lives of those who lingered too long. Yet the truth was still out of reach. And the station was patient. The decision to confront Hayes made the fateful choice, to descend once more into the hidden tunnels, journals in hand, clock diagrams mapped, and lanterns flickering against the stone walls. Grenwald insisted on accompanying him, determined to test the mechanism he had discovered in the clock tower. "We cannot ignore what this place is capable of," Grenwald said, his voice taut with tension. "It is alive, and it knows we are searching. If we fail to understand, it will continue, unabated." Their plan was audacious: navigate the labyrinthine tunnels, document anomalies, and attempt to disrupt the central clock mechanism that controlled the frozen 317 moment. It was as close to a confrontation as one could dare with a building that seemed to think and act independently. Descending into darkness, the tunnels were colder than ever, a tangible presence pressing against their bodies. The air was thick, almost viscous, filled with whispers that seemed to emerge from the stone itself. Hayes and Grenwald moved cautiously, lanterns casting long shadows that flickered as if alive. Footsteps echoed, though no one else was present. The faint glow of the unknown pulsed further down the corridor, beckoning them toward the central chamber beneath the station. Hayes' hand trembled as he held the journals, each page a reminder of the vanished workers, the warnings etched into stone, and the frozen clocks above. "It's waiting for us," Hayes whispered. "And it knows we've come." The chamber beneath the station. They reached a large chamber, walls carved with symbols that matched those in the journals and the clock tower mechanism. In the center, the enormous gear they had discovered earlier was suspended in the air, seemingly floating, its metal surface glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The pulsing hum of the station was louder here, vibrating through their bones. Grenwald approached cautiously, hands trembling as he traced the gear's intricate patterns. "This is the heart of it," he said. "Whatever controls the clocks, whatever bends time, it is here." Suddenly, the shadows coalesced. Figures emerged, hazy and indistinct, but unmistakably human in form. Some wore the uniforms of long-vanished workers, others seemed to shimmer between decades, carrying tools, watches, and journals. Hayes' heart raced. The station was manifesting the souls it had consumed, or at least projecting echoes of them to protect its core. Confronting the entity, Grenwald began adjusting the central gear with precise movements. Each rotation caused subtle changes above, clocks in the chamber twitched, flickered, and momentarily freed themselves from 317 before snapping back. "It resists," Grenwald said, sweat dripping from his brow. "It knows what we are doing." The air grew heavy. The whispers became voices, murmuring warnings, pleas, and threats. Shadows stretched unnaturally, forming walls of darkness that seemed to pulse in sync with the frozen time above. Hayes realized they were not just fighting mechanics, they were contending with a conscious presence, one that had existed for decades, observing every move, anticipating every action. "It's alive," Hayes said, voice shaking. "And it's angry." The moment of revelation. As Grenwald continued to manipulate the gear, a wave of insight struck Hayes. He recognized the pattern he had seen across the decades: 317 was not arbitrary. It marked a temporal vulnerability, a heartbeat of the station's consciousness, a moment when it was both strongest and most susceptible. "If we interfere now," Hayes said, "we might stop it, or provoke it entirely." Grenwald nodded grimly. He adjusted the mechanism with surgical precision, aligning it to disrupt the rhythm of the central clock. For a heartbeat, time itself wavered. The shadows faltered. The whispers became dissonant. And then, a shudder ran through the station, as if it were screaming in protest. All clocks flickered, some moving forward, others backward, then, finally, resumed their natural flow. 317 was no longer frozen. The building trembled one last time, a deep, resonant vibration that shook the tunnels, then fell silent. The aftermath. The chamber was still. The shadows had vanished, leaving only the echo of their passage. Hayes and Grenwald emerged into the main hall to see the station in a strange calm. Trains moved as scheduled. Passengers appeared unaware of the near catastrophe. Clocks ticked normally, synchronized perfectly across the station. Yet both men knew that the battle had been only partial. The station had retreated, not surrendered. Its presence lingered in the walls, the floors, and the hidden tunnels. Its consciousness, whatever it was, had been temporarily disrupted, but not destroyed. "It will wait," Hayes said quietly, staring at the central clock. "And it will return." Grenwald, weary and pale, nodded. "We've interrupted its pulse, but the entity remains. Our understanding is partial. We've glimpsed its mind, but we have not mastered it." Emotional resolution for Hayes, the confrontation was bittersweet. He had faced the entity, understood its patterns, and survived, yet he carried the weight of the lost, the workers, the vanished travelers, the children and families whose lives were forever altered. The journals had preserved their stories, the confrontation had preserved their echoes. He realized the human cost was not merely historical, it was ongoing. The station's hunger had been slowed, but the building remained patient, waiting for those who might linger too long. Foreshadowing and haunting conclusion. As Hayes left the station, he glanced once more at the central clock. The hands moved steadily now, showing the passage of time in ordinary increments. But a faint unease lingered. The station had learned, adapted, and perhaps even acknowledged its intruders. "It is alive," Hayes whispered to himself. "And it remembers us." The story of the station would continue, retold in whispers, journals, and personal accounts. Travelers would avoid the maintenance corridors, staff would speak of shadows and whispers, and 317 would remain an indelible mark on local folklore. Some say that if you enter the station alone at night, the air thickens, and a subtle pressure presses against you. Some claim to see fleeting shadows near the central clock. And those who know the story, who have studied the journals or followed the accounts of Hayes and Grenwald, understand one undeniable truth: the station is alive, patient, and eternal. Time may resume, clocks may tick, and schedules may continue. But the memory of 317, the frozen moment, and the entity beneath the station, remains embedded in stone, steel, and shadow. And one day, it will pulse again. Even after the confrontation in the tunnels and the temporary restoration of time, the station never felt ordinary again. For Detective Leonard Hayes, and even for Elias Grenwald, the experience had left indelible marks, not just on memory, but on perception itself. The building had revealed glimpses of its consciousness, yet its full intent remained a mystery. The trains ran on schedule. Commuters passed through the concourse as if nothing had happened. But anyone attuned to subtle shifts, to whispers in walls or shadows that lingered too long, could feel the residue of what had transpired. The station remembered, and it was patient. Personal reflections. Hayes kept a journal of his own, separate from Grenwald's mechanical notes. In it, he wrote, "We have survived, yet the station's heartbeat echoes in my chest. I cannot step onto a platform without feeling it beneath my feet, counting, waiting. It watches, always, through the seconds, the hours, the trains that pass. 317 is no longer frozen, but it is not gone. It waits for the next moment, the next soul, the next interruption." He began to understand the psychological weight carried by those who had vanished over the decades. The workers' journals had been warnings, the clocks, symbols. The station was a predator and a historian, simultaneously collecting lives and chronicling its own existence. Public awareness and silence. Despite Grenwald and Hayes documenting their findings, the outside world remained mostly unaware. Railway executives carefully controlled the narrative, releasing reports of minor electrical malfunctions and maintenance delays. Newspapers hinted at unexplained phenomena but avoided detail, and the event became a legend whispered rather than reported. Yet for those who knew the story, the station had become a place of enduring suspense. Employees refused late-night shifts. Travelers sensed a heaviness in the concourse after dark. Even tourists who visited the station during the day sometimes reported inexplicable cold drafts, flickering shadows, or the faint sound of clocks ticking out of sync. The legend was alive, and thriving. The persistent mystery Hayes frequently returned to the station, despite the danger. He found himself drawn to the maintenance corridors, the tunnels, and the clock tower. Each visit revealed subtle anomalies, a clock slightly ahead or behind schedule, a shadow stretching unnaturally, a whisper from a corridor with no living occupants. Grenwald, though more cautious, acknowledged the same phenomena. In private correspondence, he wrote, "The station is resilient. We may have disrupted its pulse, but we have not silenced it. It is patient, observant, and deliberate. The mechanisms we saw are only one layer. Beneath the stone, the shadows, the clocks, lies something older, something eternal. We only glimpsed it." The frozen moment of 317 became a symbol, a temporal scar in the building and in memory. It was a reminder that time could be manipulated, controlled, and even weaponized by a force that human understanding could only partially grasp. Lingering presence visitors who passed through the station after the confrontation sometimes reported a sense of unease. Some described hearing a faint hum beneath the floors, synchronized with their own heartbeat. Others felt a cold draft despite warm temperatures. And a few claimed to see fleeting images, figures in old-fashioned attire, tools abandoned mid-shift, or shadows moving independently of any light source. Hayes knew what they were witnessing was the echo of the station's consciousness, a reminder that it had not been defeated, merely disrupted. The frozen clocks, the journals, the hidden tunnels, and the central mechanism were all part of a larger, ongoing system. The station observed, waited, and learned. Replay value and reflection. The story of 317, the vanished workers, and the living station had layers that compelled revisitation. Each reading, each retelling, revealed new connections, the recurring symbols, the journal's warnings, the precise mechanical anomalies, and the psychological toll on those who encountered the station. The audience, whether onlookers in the past or viewers in the present, became part of the station's lingering pulse. The tension, suspense, and unanswered questions created a loop. The more one engaged with the story, the more the station seemed to reach through the narrative, subtly influencing perception and leaving the mind unsettled. Hayes' epilogue was clear: the station's story would never truly end. It persisted in stone, steel, and shadow, a living monument to time, obsession, and the unknown. The final whisper. In his last written entry, Hayes captured the essence of the station's enduring power. Time may move, clocks may tick, trains may arrive and depart, but the station remembers. It has patience beyond our comprehension. One day, 317 will return, not as a frozen instant, but as a pulse, a heartbeat, a reminder of its presence. We have seen only a fraction. It is eternal, and it watches. The words echoed in Grenwald's own notes. Both men understood, the confrontation had changed the station, but it had not ended its influence. 317 was no longer frozen in a single moment, it existed in memory, in shadow, in the pulse beneath the floors. The station had become a timeless entity, one that would haunt generations, challenge understanding, and inspire both fear and fascination. Haunting conclusion. Section 11 closes the narrative with reflection, lingering dread, and emotional resonance. The station is simultaneously resolved and unresolved, clocks move, yet the shadow of 317 endures. The tunnels, the journals, the central mechanism, and the living presence remain, a cinematic loop that encourages replay, analysis, and emotional engagement. The haunted station is alive in memory and imagination. Its story is infinite, a dark history and a cautionary tale. Some buildings are not inert structures, they are sentient, patient, and eternal. And the pulse of 317 will continue, echoing in stone, steel, and shadow.